Howdy, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Okayest Trapper podcast. As always, we are brought to you by some amazing sponsors like Cryptic, Blokes Modern Men's Health, Mountain Tough Fitness, and Trapline Beard Oil. Do me a favor, leave a 5-star review on whatever platform you're tuning in from and use the promo codes in the show notes for some great discounts on these wonderful brands. Now, today's guest is a gentleman that I met in a non-typical way. After sending him a copy of my latest book, The Trade Gap, he reached out to discuss a few different topics. But he made sure to mention that he himself had dabbled in trapping some. Intrigued by all stories related to trapping, from the novice to the professional, I kindly asked if he would join me today to kind of talk about his history in this, what I would call a waning recreation that we do in the United States of America. Now, coming all the way from the great state of Iowa, Teeg Stouffer, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It is a joy to be on the Okayest Trapper. Thanks for having me. I am excited about this.
Yeah, I'm excited too. I know we had gone back and forth. We've had some conversations down other topics, semi-related to trapping, or at least related to trades as a broader skill set that we need to acquire within the United States. Mm-hmm. But as mentioned in the intro, you and I really connected because you're like, hey, not only am I interested in the trade gap, but I also have had some experience in trapping. And, in that vein, I want to kick it off with the same question I ask everybody, which is, Teej, what is your first core memory of ever being exposed to trapping?
Ooh, my first memories in the outdoors are very clear to me because I've articulated, because they are like seminal to who I am. And so some of these earliest outdoor experiences for me was fishing. I come from a fishing first family, and I'm 3 years old. I'm digging in the worm thing. I'm catching those first bluegill at a very precious lake to us. And I made my living in the outdoor industry for so long. So you're just repeating those stories over and over. You're recalling those memories and you're repeating them. And those images stay fresh even as we get older, right? With trapping, it's different. For me, the trapping journey is not very old. I was exposed to it as a Boy Scout. So whatever that is, 12, 13, 14 years old, I was exposed to this concept of trapping. And I always liked reading those frontier type books. So as a kid, I'm reading American history books. You're exposed to trapping through this historical recountings of, how Europeans settled America and the role that trapping played in that. And so, exposed to it through that. But this is fuzzy because it's not visceral. It's not a firsthand experience, right? It's literature. And then I was re-exposed to it 15 years ago when my nephew, he was one of my hunting buddies, and really this kid who's, I'm 20 in my 20s and he's in his early teens, right? And he had another guy in his life who was taking him trapping, and I kind of had to wrestle with that. We could talk more about that. But then I had kids of my own, and that's when trapping entered my life.
Well, that's interesting. So I got to ask too, thinking back to the Boy Scouts, though, I know you said those are kind of fuzzy memories because obviously there was nothing that cemented it. You weren't out trapping a beautiful mink or something, but what were those? Were those more I didn't do Boy Scouts, Eagle Scouts, anything like that, but I would imagine it's kind of the primitive style of trapping. Here's how to make a deadfall with a rock, or here's how to build a basic snare. Is that right? Or was it a little bit more of modern type of trapping that you guys were at least getting exposed to at that young age?
I would be willing to bet that in the Boy Scouts of the 1950s and 1960s, some of that survivalist stuff was probably in the Boy Scout manual. And I bet there was some of that survivalist stuff, snares and stuff in the Boy Scout manual that I'm reading. But I'm thinking about times when you go to Camp Matigua. If you're from Iowa, that's the Boy Scout camp, right? There's a few of them. The Howard H. Cherry Boy Scout camp is over here in Eastern Iowa, but I'm from Central Iowa, so it would be Camp Matigua, which couldn't be a better Boy Scout camp name, right? And it's the naturalist is there and they have this big line of furs and you get to check out the furs. You get to handle the furs as a kid. You're checking out these furs and you're thinking about how'd they get these furs? Well, they got them through trapping, and they show you some of the traps. And so you're exposed to it. And I'm sure that there are Boy Scout troops out there where there's a trapper. One of the leaders is a trapper, and they're taking the kids on a trap line or giving them those hands-on experiences. We didn't have those hands-on experiences. I don't know if trapping has even ever been one of the merit badges you can get, but certainly fishing is, and some of those other kind of experiences are like merit badges that you literally have to complete the exercise, do the thing, and get the badge. I don't know if trapping is or not, but
Hey,
probably.
if it's not, we should be lobbying for that. I think that
Yeah.
could be a good addition to the Boy Scout manual and the evolution of building strong, resilient young men in our country. But before we kind of dive in, to you with your nephew getting exposed to it, then having your own kids, frankly, I'm a little interested in the fishing part because I
Oh
think
yeah.
of Iowa, I think of lakes of corn, not necessarily good fishing lakes, which I'm sure there are because there's great lakes all over the United States. But you mentioned that you've spent your lifetime in the outdoor industry, and from our other conversations, I know it's related to fishing. But what is it about fishing that caught you at such a young age as a kid? And, you said ripping those first bluegill out of a lake that's really special to you guys, so much so that you did kind of pursue, I don't know if it was by happenstance or by design, a career kind of in the fishing industry, and maybe touch on that a bit.
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, I've always loved fishing. I mean, almost to the level of an obsession. I remember I was in the 5th grade and we were learning how to write letters. And so one of the things was you would write a letter to your childhood hero, right? And so in that era, there's a big stocky kid in my class who wrote a letter to Joe the Refrigerator Perry, who was like a big lineman in the Chicago Bears of the day, the Super Bowl shuffle, like that era, 1980s. And so like there was a kid who wrote to like Kirk Cameron, right? There was a kid who wrote to, I don't know, like Madonna, right? Like I wrote to Jimmy Houston. Jimmy Houston was like my hero, this guy who was on TNN. He had a fishing show on TNN, and Hank Parker was a hero to me, and Shaw Grigsby and Roland Martin. Like these guys were my heroes. I was a 12-year-old kid who had a subscription to Boys Life and Bassmaster. I've just always loved fishing, and all my time was in like the outdoors, but my family wasn't really into hunting. My mom was a kind of really, they were really not into killing stuff. My real animal lovers. And I'm an animal lover too. I also like to eat them. I'm not a vegetarian, but fishing was a big part of our life. My grandmother fished 5 days a week. My mom fished 1 or 2 days a week. My dad liked to fish too, but he worked more, he worked more. So it was just a huge part of our life. And I went on to have a career in the media. There's a big overlap between the outdoor industry and media for me. And I learned that like people's musical preferences overlap with their first experiences of freedom. Well, my first experiences of freedom were in the outdoors. And so it bonds us to these things where we experience our first experiences of freedom bond us to those things. And you can kind of see that in people's lives. So our music preferences are often tied to our experiences in freedom. For me, going to the lake and just my parents saying, just go, and letting us just be, in the best ways, feral in the outdoors was what really bonded me to it. And then that was connected to fishing and not hunting or trapping for me. But in fishing, there's something that's close to trapping. If fishing is close to hunting, then trot lines and set lines is close to trapping. And we did do that. And I love doing set lines, and we'd catch all these big fish with set lines. And we would also, one time we caught a heron, for example, and that was a wild time.
Oh, I bet maybe that'll come up again later when I ask about wild times in the woods. But I think you're right, and that's the first time I've actually heard that. I don't know if you call it an analogy or just like a life lesson of musical interests tied to your first taste of freedom. I don't know why Queen pops up in my head, but maybe that was tied to something that I got to experience while I was out in the woods as an adult.
Wait, let me give you a quick thing on that. You're a little younger than me. Was Wayne's World in your thing?
Yeah, I was on that cusp.
Queen, Bohemian Rhapsody, they're in that car. Like it's these teenagers who are driving around in this car and they're like experiencing freedom. Like that would be there's my thesis.
Yeah, no, I like it. And then that sticks with them and it brings it back. It's like they call it what is it, drunken recall, essentially. Like you hear that song and it takes you right back, or you smell that certain smell and it takes you back to a moment. You're like, man, I forgot about that. with the fishing, like I want to say one thing. Out of all of my guests that I've had on this show, I would say 70% of the folks that would consider themselves to be, whether it be market trappers, nuisance trappers, someone who's trapping, let's say 150 days out of the year, all started with fishing.
Yeah.
Like all of them. Like there's been very few conversations I've had where fishing as a core memory and kickoff or something that overtook their love of trapping at one point has all been fishing, which is why I have avoided fishing at all costs.
You don't want to do that. It is a gateway drug. So I mentioned that I worked in the outdoor industry, and I've had a number of different roles in the outdoor industry, including on the conservation side and conservation nonprofits. And so I can nerd out on this. So you want like 2 minutes of nerd on this?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so
what we're here for.
I mean, there's no nerdier nerd than me, so let me nerd it up for a second. But if we just go back to like that really, I think influential work of Richard Louv and Last Child in the Woods, and talking about our innate human need for a connection to nature. What he discovered through his work was that kids who are connected to nature do better in school, not just better in like math and science and natural sciences, but also in things like social skills and stuff like that. We need nature. So we've all, I think so many of us have kind of come to that conclusion that we as people need nature. We weren't meant to live in climate control and sterilized boxes and on artificial turf, and kids are meant to be exposed to dirt and grass and not just ground up rubber on playgrounds, right? Or even just the grassy field of a soccer field or an infield, right? We were meant to have unstructured playtime in the outdoors. That's what Louv concluded. We need unstructured playtime in the outdoors. So then how do you get kids into the outdoors? And you would think like that it would be very high accessibility things like hiking, because you don't need any gear. Anybody at any income level can hike, and you could do it anywhere, like any little park and even high urban density areas you could hike, right? But it just doesn't have that visceral connection, right? And so it doesn't work. It's highly accessible. Or you'd think, well, like bikes, or like it must be something, any of these kinds of low impact, non-consumptive use type outdoor experiences would be photography, right? Would be it. It doesn't work. Like it doesn't do it. I'm trying not to use the analogy. It doesn't hook kids. So then you get into all these other things. Well, what other outdoor activities? And the Outdoor Foundation, aided by the American Sport Fishing Association, did studies on like what things get people hooked, what really gets them into the outdoors, and it's fishing above all else, like by a wide margin. Like the data shows it. There's real science behind like what thing. And I think it has something to do with this inanimate object that's in your hand, this piece of graphite with a big piece of nylon that's going out in the water, and it's inanimate. It's just a physical object that suddenly comes to life with another living thing attached to it. And all of a sudden you are connected to another living thing through this line. And then you touch the living thing. And in so many cases, you let it go again into its environment. And something happens in our brains, this physicality of who we are that's, been with us now for centuries and eons. And so something comes to life when we get connected to that other living thing, when the inanimate becomes animate in our hand. And that transfer, whatever happens there, changes us, and it connects us to the outdoors.
I love that. And I'll give an example. So I have 3 kids. I think most people listening to the show know that. 4, 3, 1.5. So again, I've avoided fishing. I've done some like deep sea fishing, some like hand fishing and like Nicaragua, like just other places where I was drawn into it, not by like necessary choice, but like I was with a group, we did a thing, caught some fish, it was cool. But it wasn't until it was a summer, my wife and I bought those little kids plastic reels. One was Spider-Man for my son, one was Elsa, Frozen for my daughter. And, I went with my father-in-law, and we kind of just took them to a little lake. And, my daughter can cast like a crazy woman. And they caught their first little crappies like the other day, and they loved it. They loved it. And then they just kept asking, can we go fish? Can we go fish? Can we go fish? I'm like, yeah, let's do it. So then we went another weekend, and we took little plastic rods out. And I don't know if I should admit this, but Like we were going out and my daughter caught a fish, and then she's like, Dad, there's like some algae bloom. There was some little stuff around that made it kind of hard to cast into certain areas. And she's like, Dad, will you cast it out there for me? I'm like, sure. Cast this little plastic reel out there, little worm on the end. And I had to have hit like some crappie / smallmouth bass honey hole. I just kept ripping fish out of that hole. And I probably haven't had more fun in my life in a long time. Now, my daughter was also helping me reel in. I want to make sure I didn't just like push my daughter out of the way and say, it's my turn. But like between the two of us, I think we caught like 7 or 8 fish
Fun.
out of this little hole. And then took them home, cleaned them, ate them. They had it for dinner. They were like, this is awesome. And now every weekend, even though it's starting to turn cold, they're like, let's go fish. Let's go fish.
Yeah.
So I see that connection. What I didn't have as a kid. However, seeing it with my children is pretty special.
Yeah, fishing can be so many things. It can be social, as you experience. It can be intergenerationally connective, like you experience. And so many people, why do you fish? Why is it important to you? They're going to go back to intergenerational connections. My father, my grandfather, me, in my case, my mother, grandmother, my dad was in the picture. I'm grateful for that, but he just didn't have as much time. And so there's intergenerational connections. And then there's these other social connections that can happen. It can also be like a reflective time by yourself. And so fishing can be approached in that way. This can be said of hunting and trapping too, right? But these outdoor experiences, fishing just really lends itself, right? And then fishing, like trapping, is a very complex, dynamic set of variables to be solved. So you can approach it in a way of like, heave it and leave it. I'm just here to like relax, sit on a bucket, throw out a rod, see if something happens, fine. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's great. I'm just looking for an excuse to go spend time with my friends. We're going to put a couple lawn chairs on the dock and see what happens. That gives us a way to visit. Great. Fantastic. But if you're like me and your mind goes a lot and you have, an active imagination, an active mind, having this complex set of variables that's very dynamic, constantly changing, and you're trying to solve this ever-changing puzzle is really attractive. And like that's how fishing is. I mean, and it's how trapping is too. There's a complex set of variables that are dynamic, and you don't control them, and you're trying to outsmart an animal, right? And fishing, it's an aquatic animal, and in trapping, it's terrestrial.
Yeah, well, sometimes aquatic, sometimes both, right?
Can be, yeah,
Yes,
can be right.
But I think that's great. Let's actually pull on the intergenerational thread a little bit, because I think this is a great segue back to trapping for you. You had mentioned you had been exposed to it, nothing really like hooked you, right? Kind of growing up until you were in your probably 20s, late 20s, and your nephew somehow got into trapping. Explain that a little bit, and like what that relationship was like, and then what it was that kind of caught you a little bit to say, like, what are you doing? Like, let me tag along a little bit and see what this trapping thing is.
So this opens another kind of can of worms. My nephew's name is Tony, great guy. He's actually hunting out in Wyoming right now as we record this. He's hunting out in Wyoming right now and just become a terrific man. He came into my life. He's actually my wife's nephew. And so when my wife and I, started dating, he came into my life. I was in my early 20s. He was, I think, 10 years old. And he comes from an agricultural background, but not as much of an outdoorsy background, but he was in scouts also. And so I think it was his scout leader maybe that took him, going back to the scouts. I think it was scout leader, like not as part of Boy Scouts, just came to know each other through Boy Scouts. And sorry about that. He had gone trapping with this guy, and really my first take on it was like, I'll take you fishing, I'll take you hunting. I don't know about trapping, Tone. I just don't know about that. Like, if you want to do it with Mike, that's up to you guys. I don't want to eat it, like whatever it is. And if I had such a strong ethic of, if you kill it, you got to eat it. And so like, I don't want to eat a raccoon really. I definitely don't want to eat like a muskrat for sure. And like, so I don't need a fur. Like, I don't, like, I just don't, this doesn't appeal to me. I'm going to say a word that on this podcast might, stink up the room a little bit, but like, it seemed kind of cruel. I had a lack of familiarity with it, and I just didn't It didn't appeal to me, but I liked that this other guy was spending time with him and he was spending time with another person of good character, you know? So I liked that. But that was kind of the first intersection of me with it, but it didn't hook me either, you
Mhm.
know?
Did you so this guy, Mike, like you said, there's that weird dichotomy where, in your head, you have this idea of trapping, which to your point was like, is this a cruel activity? Is it like, I get often, man, trapping must be for lazy people. You put something out there and you indiscriminately, catch an animal, which for any trapper, as you know now, like it's the furthest thing from the truth. Just
It's
kind of like,
physical. It's
yeah,
physical.
it's physical, it's difficult, similar to fishing. Like, my understanding of fishing is like, oh yeah, you go sit on a boat and you toss a line out, woof, whoop de whoop. Like that's not tough. But when you really get into fishing, like all those dynamics, all those things you talked about make this a very difficult endeavor. So the reason you had those thoughts though, like, was it just like from the zeitgeist you were brought up in? Like for me,
Yeah.
similar, like I thought teeth on a trap was the way it would go.
Right, right,
Not
right.
not the offset jaws we have now that can like easily release an animal unharmed. It's a restraining device, not a trapping device, essentially. But was it just the conditioning that you had coming
Conditioning.
up around trapping that made it
Exactly.
a little less appealing?
Exactly. So, like, let me give you a little bit of family history here. So, I come like 2 generations off the farm, so raised in a not farming family. My parents were, came up in, the 1960s. My dad fought in Vietnam, came back kind of disenfranchised. My mom was raised by a single mother in the 1950s, 1960s, very rare, right? Rosie the Riveter was my
Mhm.
grandmother, right? And so they're hippies, right? Disenfranchised from Vietnam, hippies really fell in with that deal. And my mom was a real, like, what you would think of when you think of an animal lover. She was a dog groomer. She, was an avid supporter of the Animal Rescue League. We always had a lot of animals around, rescuing some little opossum. We had a million animals in our house, and she's just an animal lover. And but we did eat meat. Like, we weren't vegetarians. We ate meat, right? But my mom was also, they raised my brother and I to be fiercely independent, and we were very much a DIY family, which is so much why your other work resonates with me so much. We were really raised to be independent and work with our hands. And so, this is kind of a weird mix, but welcome to the Midwest, right? The Iowa, like a progressive family in Iowa does not look like a coastal progressive family at all,
Mhm.
right? It's much more of like a frontier prairie background kind of, progressivism, right? And so, uh, when I was 14 years old, I was just committed to start hunting. I had always wanted to hunt. I loved hunting, and my parents raised us to be our own people, to be independent.
Mhm.
So I couldn't drive. My mom would drive my friend Joe and Delicato and I out into the country with our 22. She drove us to hunter safety so we could get our hunter safety. Drove us out to the country with our 22s and our purple Camaro. Dropped us off out there on a gravel road and said, "See you at 4 o'clock." She hated it, but she wanted me to be independent. And so she wanted me to pursue whatever it was for me. And I remember the first time I came back with a rabbit that I had killed, and she said, "You can do what you want to do, but your choices have consequences. The
Mhm.
consequence of this is you just killed the Easter bunny." And my brother continued to celebrate like he'd get an Easter basket every year, and I didn't.
Uh,
Like, they were just like that. Like, you can do your own thing, but I don't have to approve it. I was a wrestler. I was a high school wrestler. My mom never saw me wrestle. She's like, "I don't like violence. That's a violent sport." And so she just let me do it, but didn't support it. And so it would just be one click over from hunting into trapping. Like, it just, that little animal suffering in that trap. And I was conditioned to that. I aligned with that. I'm like, she might be right, you know? And so but then you grow up and you come to your own conclusions, and you have your own experiences. And then you kind of, in so many cases, break with what your parents taught you. They're valuable people too.
100%. And like, for those who listen to this show, they know my parents, they eat meat, but I did not grow up in a hunting, trapping, fishing family at all. I didn't get into it till I was in my close to my 30s. Like I was, it was a late bloomer activity for me. But it is interesting. I do think there's a little bit about boys being boys, and I've had
Mhm.
plenty of great women on this podcast too, who are trappers who probably feel the same way. But like, there's also a very strong overlap I've noticed, and I'm going to say it because you just mentioned it. with wrestlers. I was a high school wrestler, still do
Mm.
jujitsu. Like there's some level of conquering and combat that I feel like every boy maybe doesn't desire, but needs, and whether you get it through scouts, whether you get it through wrestling and sport versus the outdoors, or if you kind of hit the hat trick where you have stable family life, you can do sports and athletics and cover stuff in the outdoors. I think that makes a really resilient, strong-willed individual. But I love the approach your parents took. And that's one that I might be adopting too. You don't have to support it necessarily, but giving and encouraging that strong independence for people to explore the bounds is pretty special. And I would imagine it was probably pretty rare from your generation.
I don't know. That's a good question. I'm not sure how prevalent or not prevalent it was. I have thought as an adult reflecting on my childhood, I think I am grateful for. Don't think I am grateful for my parents raising me to value independence. But you can take anything too far, and like nonconformity for its own sake is not a virtue, and always resisting the currents of whatever we call culture is sometimes unproductive. Like sometimes everybody agrees on something because it's the logical conclusion, but resisting it because it's the conclusion that the people around you are coming to on the merit. Like, I resist this because everybody else does. I don't know, and like you can make yourself into a weirdo by just insisting on never conforming, and so I think that I was maybe independent to a fault. We were made by our creator for community. Like we were made to be in relationship. So I think that we don't want to forsake that. So independence, but only to a point.
Yep. And I've been down that path of independence at the behest of community, and that came back to bite me.
It does.
That is always the case. But
It does.
I want to travel back a little bit then. So your initial takes to trapping when you were exposed through your nephew, was cool. Glad you're getting great mentorship. It seems to be with an upstanding guy. You're outdoors, fantastic. I don't know if I want to participate.
Yep.
What was it that then broke the mold for you? Because, for people who aren't watching on video, like before we got on the call, spoiler alert, you've got a few clues and, furs with you. So what was it that then broke the mold for you to start thinking about it in a different light that actually eventually brought you into the fold of trap?
Yeah, man. This is what I want to talk about, because I think that flipping that switch is, well, I'm a storyteller, right? And the difference between an anecdote and a story, hey, you can use this and everybody else can too. An anecdote is an interesting series of events. A story involves change of the main character. And really my career now is in filmmaking, storytelling, right? And so I'm always looking for the change of the main character. So on this podcast, I get to be the main character. And here's the change. I had boys. I had these two boys, and I've been raising these two boys, and I love to steal Clay Newcomb's line. I want to raise these boys as people who live their lives close to the land. Right? And so we have an agricultural family. My wife grew up on a farm, and so agriculture and farming is part of our life. We live in Iowa. We live on the very edge of a suburb, so they have this suburban access. They go to a suburban school, but literally at the end of my street is a cornfield, and that's the county. We live on the very edge of city limits, and we literally hunt the field to the north of our house. We hunt it for geese, and so this is like the best of every world. They have the trifecta you said about stable house, people of faith, all the things, sports and stuff, and also outdoor experiences. Just their golden childhood for these guys. And my two sons couldn't be more different. The one he came out of the womb at 60 years old. Like he's Benjamin Button. He's an old soul. And the younger one, not as much. So, but they both love fishing and all that kind of stuff. But as we got into hunting, the younger boy, Goody is his name, he has no problem quietly sitting and waiting for a deer. I'll send you a picture of this. The first deer he killed was a 160 class deer, right? We live in Iowa, and that's more accessible here than it is in other places. But he was 9 years old, and he harvested a great big buck, and sitting quietly in the woods, and the discipline that's required to handle a firearm, he just always had it. just a steady-handed kid. My other son loves things like Pokemon and whimsy. He's not like that. He's not going to sit quietly. I can't trust him with a firearm yet, and, um, I mean, nothing will ruin your day worse than somebody getting shot.
Yeah.
But he so envied the experiences that his brother and I were getting. We're talking about intergenerational stuff, and he was jealous for time with me, and that's where it was like, you know what? That trapping would really work, because then we can have these experiences where we go out into the woods together. Awesome. And set some traps. Exciting. Wonder what'll happen. Let's find out, and then we get to come back, and we get to see, did we get something? Did we get something? And then if we did, then what happens? Like then there's all these really wild experiences of getting to handle whatever we and touch them and feel them and learn about them and eat them, and harvest this fur and and that's what happened. And so the thing, again, I'm going to say this word that stinks up the room with trappers, but the cruelty part for me is like, I still, even to this day, like, I just don't know how I feel about here's the case I make about hunting. When people, I'll steal Stephen Ranella's line on this, or Temple Grandin's line, like, nature is cruel. We don't have to be. And the death that, if somebody wants to argue with me about hunting, the first thing I say is, are you a vegan? And if they're a vegan, they have a rhetorical platform to stand on. If they're not a vegan, stop it. Like an animal dies so that you can eat, stop it. It doesn't matter who kills it. It's irrelevant. You eat meat, stop it. Because the way animals die in nature is cruel. Like, death in nature is brutal. And it's awful. Death by the hunter's bullet is humane. It's swift. Like, the best way a deer could die in Iowa is to be converted from a deer to venison in an instant, So we're firearm hunters that, we tend to hunt the early muzzleloader season, and it's swift. It's humane. Man, I cannot make that. And the deer doesn't know what happened.
Yep.
It was eating, then it ceased to exist in its animate form, then it's just muscle. It's just meat, You can't make that same case with a leg hold. I can't make that same case. What happens from the point that animal has been restrained until the point where I come to encounter that animal, that's not good time for that animal. And I don't know how I feel about that. I don't have any, I'm not casting shade on anybody else. But my choice, what I choose to do, I don't know.
Yeah.
But then there's the conibear trap. And when you come to the conibear trap, you get to continue to make the same rhetorical case that I made. That beaver was alive and living the happy life the beaver lived, and then he wasn't. And then it was over. That was it.
Just swimming, and then
he's not. And then he's asleep forever.
Yep.
I love it. So that's kind of where we came into the mix, is with conibears, and beavers. And the reason we came into beavers is we were deer hunting and we were putting these trail cameras out, and there was so much beaver activity. And then we looked around and realized, oh my gosh, there's a nuisance level beaver population in this area that we love. And all the trees were getting felled in this place we really liked, and it's like the number of beavers on our trail cameras. And we just got to looking around. We're like, these are all beaver trails. And there's a massive amount of beaver activity, so much so that they were literally laying a forest on its side, right? In this area that we really held dear. And so we were like, let's trap some beavers. It's humane. I hear beavers are good to eat. Beaver fur is cool. There's a million beavers here. We won't have to wonder if we're going to encounter beavers. We might or might not be able to trap them, but they're here. We don't have to wonder, is anybody around? Is there one or two? No, there's a zillion beavers here. There's a million beavers. And so I thought, this is the perfect entry point for my boys. We're probably going to be successful. And sure enough, the first day we set the traps, we could read the sign so well. There was a log. We got there shortly after sunrise. The log was wet. We're like, that dude just came over this log and he crosses right here every day. We put a trap there, and when we came back, there was a beaver in it,
Awesome.
So just textbook, right? And so we had early success. We felt great about it. We found out beaver's delicious. It's probably our favorite wild game we get. We love eating it. And we got these furs, and so we had the experience of getting to flesh them out and all that kind of stuff, and the learning that comes from that. And then we can bring a friend. My buddies can bring a friend with them, and it's an experience we can start to share with other people, which is really a high value for us.
I'm always curious too. So you had your exposure really early as a childhood, like in your childhood and scouts, just like, okay, this is trapping. Then you had maybe a deeper exposure where you were still a little unsure with your nephew and Mike, I think he said his name was, that was kind of guiding him. And then ultimately to finding this beaver population, understanding the riparian damage that they might do, take action, set a trap, have success. What was it like that first time for you, even as an adult, which I would imagine you were probably in your 30s by this point, maybe late 20s?
40s. Yeah.
40s. Okay. So you were in your 40s, first time you're coming up on a trap that you knew you set, and then probably seeing some shade of fur. And like, what was that feeling like, even as an adult, kind of coming up on your first critter that you successfully targeted, placed a trap and then had success?
You giddy, right? You're just there's a childlike innate glee, right? Of like, we got one, guys, we got one. And then you're sharing that with your kids, which is a magnifier,
Yep.
right? And so they're giddy. Oh my gosh. And they're running down there. And it's that real joyful excitement of having had success. And the same thing we were talking about earlier with that synapse that fires in our brain when that fishing rod comes to life. Something like that happens. I also think we're really visual creatures.
Mhm.
It's fun when you cast out a line and there's a worm sitting on the bottom or a piece of cut bait sitting on the bottom, and tick, tick, that line moves. But
Mhm.
boy, isn't a bobber fun? You watch that bobber start to dit, 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 and then the bobber goes under. I love to ice fish. We're super into ice fishing. Use a Vexilar. It's like old World War II sonar, and you
Yep.
see that. You can see your jig is one little line on the, oh, another line just showed up on there. That's a fish. And then those two lines get closer and closer. And that visual thing of watching it play out, right? And we can think about other things that how we are as men or as people, the way that visual stimulus does something to us. And that same visual stimulus carries itself out when you walk up on a trap you set and the conditions have changed.
Yep.
That it is not as you left it. And you start to your heart begins to race, your mind begins to race, and also you're met with the realization that I got work to do, because there
Yeah.
gets to be a lot of work and your back's gonna get sore.
Yeah. That is the understatement of the year. So when you did that with the first time, like, as an effort to kind of bring almost your boys together, who, like you said, have
Mhm.
different, maybe on different ends of the spectrum from like their joy. And you saw this as kind of being that medium to bring everybody together in a recreational activity that works well. What was their reaction when they
Good.
first came up on a beaver? And then like you went through the experience of like
Yeah.
pulling, skinning,
It's the
eating.
whole arc, right? It starts with that like stunned curiosity. Can this be real? You know, is this? Is it? Did we? Oh, like that kind of stunned realization that happens first, and then the yes, it is real. And then like you're running out there and you got your waders on or your hippers on, and you're pulling the beaver out of the thing. And, oh my gosh, it's huge! And it's true. The first beavers we caught were big beavers, right? And so then they can't lift them, And as a dad, you're just proudly sitting back and letting them. Like, I'm not gonna jump in here. Like, I'm gonna let them struggle through this experience, and they're getting it out there. So I can't believe we got one. And then you're doing the photographs and all that stuff, and so you're having that like triumph moment, the we won the game moment, that kind of thing. And I don't mean that in any crass way. I think all the listeners would understand. Like, we respect that animal. We respect and honor the life of that animal, and it's not just about dominion or whatever, but also that those beavers were laying my favorite forest on its side, and there's too many of them, and no predation for them. Now I know another trapper's found the spot because the population plummeted, and we could see the evidence of another trapper in there later. But gosh, the same could not be said of the raccoons in our area. Our raccoon population has exploded everywhere I go. It's like crawling with raccoons. So we might become raccoon trappers this year. But
Oh, that might be a fun one. But then when you guys get the beaver out, one of the questions I always like to ask, what was, this is for people who do a lot of trapping. I'm always like, what is the biggest mistake you've made in the first shed? But I'm sure, like, what was that experience like? I'll change the question a bit. What was the experience like cutting into that beaver for the first time, realizing the fat, everything you have to do to make that fur prepped for tanning
Yeah.
or whatever you were going to do with it. I can imagine it was a bit of a learn as you go experience.
100%, 100%. And you've talked about this in some of the stuff you've, written and talked about on this podcast and, put out there. University of YouTube for us, right? I didn't have a physical mentor. Now, here's something interesting. I've heard in some of your other shows you talk about like some of the really well-known trappers, the guys who were doing the books and the DVDs back in the day. This is really a wild coincidence of life, but there's a really well-known trapper of a certain era who would always be at the convention. His name was Slim Hudson, and his brother Doug Hudson was my mentor. Nothing to do with trapping. Doug Hudson was from Montana, moved to Washington. I met him when I lived in Washington. He was like a spiritual mentor to me. And he had been a hunting outfitter, but his brother went the trapping route and trapped down through Georgia and made DVDs and was like one of those, not exactly pioneering trappers, but in modern trapping, kind of one of those guys. And he was his brother. I really never even had a relationship with Slim, but Doug was my primary mentor in life. But he wasn't mentoring me on trapping. Nobody mentored me on trapping. I just decided that this is something Finn could do. My younger son, this is something we can do in the outdoors together when it's not really fishing season. The summer fishing season's over. Ice fishing's not here yet. Hunting's not going to be good for him, but we got to be outside. I mean, we're an outdoors family. So trapping fills that niche. So that was a solution for us. Trapping was a solution for us. We went to YouTube. And as you know, there's no substitute for having somebody show you how to do a thing, and then no substitute for experience. So the first beaver we skinned, I mean,
yeah,
nobody's going to look at this. It doesn't, you got a beaver on the wall behind you, a beautiful round thing. I got this lumpy, squirrely, funny looking shaped thing, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
Yep.
There's no
I've got my first beaver one that I've ever skinned, and it looks like a Rorschach eye test,
Exactly.
It's like pulled in different angles. There's like holes missing out of it.
100%. It's a big blob amoeba of fur.
Yep.
But it's beaver fur, and we got it ourselves. Yep. And it hangs. Actually, I have it right here. This is one of them. And yeah, it's like a funny little hole right here. What's this hole doing here? Why is that there? And like, what do we got over here? Like, there's just, it's a little squirrely, know. It's not round. It's not by any means. But it hangs over the footboard of my son's bed. And so over the head of his bed is a big 160 class, deer mount. Hanging on the wall next to it is a bunch of really, big Iowa sheds that are, hanging next to it. And then over the footboard of his bed is the first beaver he ever trapped, hanging over the footboard of his bed. And I don't care who you are. You walk into that kid's room and you're like, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, no, that is awesome. And I said, my first experiences with that, with the, Professor YouTube are, we're not winning any top lot awards, that's for sure. But again, it comes with experience, and then you get better. And then you sometimes find mentorship in person too, which is always helpful. And then if you keep at it, and there's also the tenacity of children too. Like, I'm sure after that first experience with your kids, they probably got the bug, and then they probably wanted to learn how to do it better. That's the one thing I've noticed even with my kids at 4 years old. Like my daughter, when she goes beaver trapping with me, and she's so interested in pulling up the lips and looking at the teeth. She's so interested in, as we cut into like, what's this, what's that? But she'll help me put up beaver, and she'll be like, Dad, you missed this spot, like fleshing. I'm like, oh. And we let our kids handle knives, and they get the chance to do it on their own. And then they get so meticulous, more so than me, which is a blessing in my mind, because they almost slow me down in a good way to focus on some of the little minutia that I would otherwise kind of speed through. And I'm sure that's probably part of your experience too.
Yeah. And it's a teamwork. I mean, as you know, a big beaver's heavy. I mean, like it's a big animal, and their fur doesn't, like with a rabbit, you can peel them like a banana. It ain't like that with a beaver. And so it's teamwork. It's like one person pulling on that flesh while the other person works the knife, and somebody helping pull a leg or pull, stretch that animal out to make it easier. And so it's very much teamwork. Now, here's the other thing. I had no idea how sore my back was going to be. Our beaver spot was a 1 mile from where we park, which we love this. This particular spot we love is like a 1 mile go, And so you've already like backpacked your stuff in there. In some cases, we'll like use a trailer behind a bike and ride it all in there, So anyway, you get back in there, and we had taken a tarp, and we had the beaver. I think we might have even had 2 beavers. I can't remember, but maybe just one, and then we got the next one the next day. Doesn't matter. Brought a tarp, spread the tarp out on the ground, and did it on the ground. God, I had no idea how sore my back was gonna be. I've never felt more old, than skinning a beaver on the ground. For some reason, there's something about the muscles I use that boy, did I feel that.
Yeah, I mean, whether you're in a beaver stand, whether you got them on a table, like there's something about touching a beaver that just automatically gives you back pain. It
Glad it's
doesn't
not
matter.
just me, man.
Yeah, I think it's just the magic of a beaver, reaching out from the other side of the world saying, nope, yeah, I get one last little
One
nick
last
in on
bite.
you and it's going to be your back. That's at least it is for me. Like I'll do that and I'll have a stack of beaver to do. And, God bless the people who are putting up real numbers, who are doing dozens of beavers every day. But,
Unbelievable.
I'll do one or two and I'll be toast.
The thing that I tell people about this, so we don't, most of our animal protein we harvest ourselves. We eat a little bit of chicken, eat a little bit of pork, very little bit of beef. Most of the animal protein at our house we've harvested ourselves. And so I always say, like, I'm not being euphemistic. I'm not being funny about eating beaver. I'm not like I'm being like, it's just the God's honest, straight up the middle truth. I love eating beaver. Like, it is probably the best. And you wouldn't necessarily think, oh, man, it's coming out of a marsh, must stink. I don't know. I heard something about glands. Don't they have some kind of gland that can't possibly be good? And I think all that stuff can be said of a muskrat. I think, but beavers, kind of like a cow. Like, I mean, they're vegetarians and whatever. I don't know, but I don't like when people do this, when they'll like serve somebody something and then they'll be like, did you like it? And the person's like, it was great. And then they'll be like, you know what you just ate?
Yeah.
I think I'm not for that. Like, I don't want to, that's not how I make relationships with my friends. My friends can trust me. But if I served beaver stroganoff to somebody, especially if I cooked it in beef stock, they would never know they weren't eating beef stroganoff. And if anything, they'd be like, man, that's really rich beef. That's really good. What'd you do to this beef? But and I don't know, maybe it's different in different parts of the country, but in Iowa, our corn-fed beavers taste a lot like beef. And it's probably the best wild game we get. I really like them. So part of the motivation for me now is we get food we like to eat,
Yeah, here where we're at, I love it, especially because I do mostly winter trapping, unless it's a nuisance job. The struggle that I have, and I'd be curious, like, when does your trapping season open in Iowa?
November 1st.
November 1st. So
About to open. Yeah.
Yeah, we got a couple days here. One of the things that I was always worried about was, you have a conibear, you put the animal down very swiftly, but it might be 24 hours before you get back to it. Here, like, we have extremely cold rivers and water, so I don't have to worry about meat spoiling or anything. But is that ever a concern where you're at there, or is it
it could
enough
be
in the season?
I'm sure that it could be at certain times, especially with the nuisance thing. But Iowa's like, we are still in the ice belt. We ice fish here. So by November 1st, like, our nights are generally going to be kind of in the upper. I mean, we've had snow in October. It's literally snowed on Halloween, but that's a little bit fluky, But by this time, you're talking about like water temps in the 40s, air temps in the 30s overnight. And the way we set our traps, the earliest we would be getting something is like that dusky sunset time. And then we check them in the morning. The latest we ever check them is like after church on Sunday. So the latest we'd ever be, we never set a trap for more. We're never going to be more than 24 hours in a trap. And usually it's going to be like 12 hours in a trap. It's probably never broken 50 degrees, and then, it's just really not a spoilage concern at all.
Yeah, that's good. Well, I mean, we love beaver as well. Again, not euphemistic, but just like we eat it. We make barbecue beaver sandwiches.
Yes, absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
It's rich as long as you take care of the meat. But that could be the same said for deer too. Like if you nick a gland on a deer, you might have a different flavor. So it's all about care and taking care of everything you need to know.
That is the truth.
I know we're running up on time here, so I want to respect that for you because I'm sure you've got other calls on a regular Tuesday. But I really have two questions that I want to ask that I ask everybody. And if we have time, I'll ask you one more. But what's the wildest experience that you've ever had in the woods?
I mean, I knew you were going to ask this, and I told myself to be really thinking about it. sorry about that. I've had some really wild experiences. This is not glamorous, but I just remembered it recently. When I was a kid, I was a really outdoorsy kid. I was like the most outdoorsy kid. And I had some friends in junior high. Remember how awkward junior high was? I mean,
Oh
just
yeah.
for everybody. You're trying to figure it out, transitional with your friends, kind of get out of elementary school into this bigger school. Had this friend, and these guys wanted to be outdoorsy. They were outdoorsy-ish. They wish they were outdoorsy. And we got one of the dads to take us out camping.
Hmm.
And I didn't know these guys that well. We went out to the Raccoon River, Walnut Woods, and pitched a tent. And there was one dad, and I think there's like 7
Oh,
boys.
God bless them.
And I was really outdoorsy, and all these other boys they'd had much less experience in the outdoors and whatever. And that dad, we learned, had a drinking problem,
Oh boy.
and he just got absolutely fall down drunk, like
That's gotta
past
be a weird experience, especially if you don't come from a family of
drinking. Yeah, and I didn't come from a family of drinking, and so it just turned into a weird night, Lord of the Flies, some number of kids who were very uncomfortable in the outdoors, in the woods at night, a passed out man, slumped over a picnic table. I lost a fishing rod that night. We had a row of fishing rods on the bank, and like grabbed this rod, pulled it off into the river. And I'm trying to kind of like be the adult in the room. And then kids are like catching carp and throwing them in the tent. And so the dad will wake up, no, there's a fish in here, and just a wild, uncomfortable fever dream. Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas meets Meat Eater, crazy experience. Just a weird, unsettling, like, I'm not doing that again kind of deal.
That's a pretty good one. That's a unique one. I mean, as a dad now, I'd hope that my son had the wherewithal or experience that if he was ever found in a situation like that, he could do like you and kind of be like play the adult a little bit. But man, that's a little terrifying, but also
Weird one.
Yeah, not one you probably want to relive.
Yeah, you want to tell the stories of the times, and I mean, we all have stories like it, where it's kind of like, I might have lost a toe there, or like kind of near death, or this is true, like rappelled down into a canyon once and camped in a canyon for 3 days. You kind of have some of those like hero stories where you're the hero of the story or something, or just like, oh my gosh, that was a near death experience, but I lived, or the time that you had to poop so bad and you're out in the middle of the lake, of those funny ones, and we've all got all those. But when I think about like really wild, like, what in the world? What just happened here?
That's a good one. I like that. All right. So I always end on a hypothetical. So this is for you, Teej. If trapping and filmmaking both disappeared tomorrow and you could only save one to pass on to the next generation, which would you choose and why?
Filmmaking all day long. Filmmaking. I am so committed to this matter of heritage and legacy. And I think that we're losing it. I actually think trapping can be a conduit for it, but I think telling the stories of past generations is critical. So, I'm a heritage and legacy filmmaker. I do all kinds of documentaries, but I'm really interested in this thing. And I write about this thing of legacy. And I think that we have a generation now, today, that's being defined as the anxiety generation and we know why, right? This never-ending doom scroll, and everything is presented as an existential threat. This is the election that will define everything, and the world is going to end, and it's almost now, and like everything is presented as an existential threat, and so that creates a generation anxiety. And also, we've just fallen into the hole of our phone, and we've lost our ability to have intergenerational conversations. And the truth of the matter is, I was doing a documentary for a town in Iowa, and I looked at their headline. I looked at the oldest newspaper they had in their little local history museum. It was 100 years old. The front page looked an awful lot like today, only things were worse. So, like, for example, back then, Main Street would burn down every few years. We don't have that, like complete catastrophic loss, right? And like, we think about the political rhetoric of today, and yes, the political rhetoric is hot. the top story in the newspaper that day was that the townspeople had gotten furious with the city council in one of these little towns in northern Iowa, and they hung them. And they called it out based on ethnic, racial lines. They killed them. That's some hot political rhetoric. And then the story that's right in the middle of that paper was, by God, somebody wants to put the 10 commandments in our schools. You know what I mean? And it's like, we are still fighting that fight. So when, it's bad. You know what? It's been bad. It's been really bad. And
it's like humans or something.
Right. It's like we're humans or something. We got through it, guys. We got through it. We got through hard times. You think, World War II was really bad. You know, like the Civil War was really bad. And like all the time between those wars, also there was really bad. And we got through it. And so it's so important that we're telling those stories from generation to generation. Yes, it's hard. You're going to make it. Like, it's so important. And the type of filmmaking I do, I think, does that. And so I could never trap again and still feel like I was making a meaningful contribution to the world and society and the generations.
I love it. Well, Teeg, first and foremost, thank you for taking the time, an hour out of your day to come chat all things fishing, trapping, and legacy. Where can people find out about some of your films or anything else that you're working on that people might be interested in?
Yeah, thank you. Fascination Film Studio, fascinationfilms.com. I'm real active on LinkedIn, and you'll find me on Facebook and Instagram. So Teeg Stouffer, I'm the only one of those around. And then Fascination Film Studio, fascinationfilms.com. I will say this, there is one other Fascination Films floating around out there. And so if you find the European erotica, that's not me.
Okay, good. Well, that's clear. Otherwise, people are like, man, this guy really does do legacy films. All right. Well, appreciate it, Teeg. And for everybody listening, we'll catch you on another episode of the Okayest Trapper podcast.